The doctors had 17 rubber bags standing by for me to fill. But I fooled them. I kept going so long that they ran out of bags. The doctor said this was the first time that it had ever happened, so I think I broke that record too. When I finished the test in the altitude chamber, the attendant told me that he had never seen anyone spend 2 hours at a simulated altitude of 65,000 feet without showing some increase in his pulse rate or his blood pressure. I had just managed to do that, so I felt pretty good. And when I hopped on and off a 20-inch step without letting my pulse shoot up too much, the doctor said, "Boy, you've been wrecking records all over the place. And I think this is another one." He checked, and sure enough it was. Another record fell when the doctors asked me to blow into a tube that held a column of mercury. The purpose of this was to see how long I could keep blowing before I ran out of wind. The record up until then was 94 seconds. I thought to myself, I'll just count up to 100 as fast as I think seconds ought to go, and I'll try to break this record too. I counted too slowly, however, and when I finally had to give up, I found out I had blown into the tube for 171 seconds without taking a breath. This little victory pleased me very much. The doctors were jumping up and down. I was next to the last in our group to take this test. Then John Glenn came along and managed to blow into the tube for 151 seconds. John did well all through these tests, too. He told me one day that he'd overheard the doctors say the two of us were doing so well they were going to tell Washington about us. The funny thing about the breathing test was that a man can store up enough air in one breath to last him for at least 7 minutes if he needs it. When you feel you are running out of air and have to take another breath, it is not because your oxygen supply is running low. You have oxygen to burn, but simply because the little carbon dioxide detectors in your system are warning you that the CO2 concentration in your lungs is piling up above normal and that you ought to clear out with another breath. All you have to do, if you are taking a test like this and really want to beat it, is to ignore those little CO2 detectors and keep going. You won't faint. It is just a matter of how much control you have over your own system. Anyone can do it if he is motivated, and I was motivated. I guess I was motivated on the psychological test too. At least, I enjoyed taking them. I especially liked the Rorschach ink blot test. This is where the psychologists show you blobs of blotted ink and ask you to describe what the patterns look like. Renee had studied abnormal psychology at school and had told me about these tests. She said all she could usually see in the ink blot was a bunch of bats, but she warned me that this sort of upset the psychologists who gave the test because they had a theory that there was something wrong with anyone who kept seeing bats one after another. So I went into the test watching out for bats. I saw only a few of them, but I identified them when I did. "That's a bat," I said the first time a psychologist showed me a blot of ink. That looked exactly like a black creature with wings on it. He rose up out of his chair with a look of fascination and asked, "Which way is it flying?" "Straight at us," I said. I don't know whether this was the right answer, but he let me go. We also had to arrange some wooden blocks the way children do in a nursery. This seemed kind of silly, but I assumed the doctors knew what it was they were looking for, so I did not mind. I did pretty well on the idiot box. This was an electronic gadget full of flashing lights and buzzing buzzers, which was supposed to rattle us. You were allowed 5 seconds to straighten out the mess, and you were supposed to push buttons and pull levers and do all kinds of things in combination to keep the buzzers quiet and make the lights go out. A recorder kept score on you. The box got so frantic sometimes that if you sat behind someone else while he was banging away at it, the effects was really hilarious. The doctors ran the box first at normal speed for 30 seconds. Then we had to manage it at double speed for 35 minutes. Finally, the doctors bore down and speeded the thing up to quadruple speed for the last 40 minutes. The man who made the contraption claimed that no one could keep up with it even at normal speed, but some of us managed to stay on top of all the lights and buzzers at quadruple speed, and the people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where we took the test, were amazed. I guess they thought we would panic. They even had the soles of our feet instrumented, because skin resistance is a good measurement of whether or not a subject is panicking. We got so wrapped up trying to beat the box, however, that the work went very smoothly. I think the final portion of this test was probably the fastest 40 minutes that I ever spent. It was a good test of coordination and fast reflex action. The same kind of qualities that we would be needing when we went up in the capsule. I could not understand the value of the who am I test. All you had to do is think of a long list of words which described you, and this seemed so simple that I could not imagine why we had to take it. I answered, I am a man, I am a naval aviator, I am a father, I am a husband, I am 33, I am an archer, I am a swimmer, I am a skin diver, etc. I filled out all the blanks, and in the very last one I wrote, I am a prospective Mercury astronaut. Perhaps that answer helped too. At any rate, I got on the team and I got off the ship. The next thing I had to do before I settled down at the Mercury headquarters at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia was move my family there from California. I was getting things ready to pack at her home in Long Beach when the landlord brought a lady over to show her the house. He had told her who I was. She came into the room where I was working and asked me if I was really one of those new spacemen. I told her I was, and she said, "You're a nut." Then she walked off to look at the kitchen. I guess she was not the only one who thought that. My father wrote me from Colorado that he was overwhelmed I was getting the chance to pioneer on such a grand scale. But he said some of his friends were wondering why I would volunteer for such a dangerous and untried mission. I could have told them that I volunteered for a number of reasons. One of these, quite frankly, was that I thought this was a chance for immortality. Pioneering in space was something that I would willingly give my life for. As I told Renee, I think a person is very fortunate to have something in life that he can care that much about. Next verse. Flying is in my blood. Leroy Gordon Cooper, Jr. I can thank my dad for my flying career. I started flying with him when I was a young boy, and flying has been in my blood ever since. Dad never had any formal flight training, but he became an excellent pilot. He was in the Navy during World War I. Then, after the war, he became a member of the Army National Guard. He was out of the service for several years, but soon after World War II was declared, he entered active duty with the Army Air Corps. He retired as an Air Force colonel a few years ago. While he was still in civilian life and was living in Shawnee, Oklahoma, where I grew up, Dad bought a Commandair biplane, which had been designed as a World War I fighter trainer. It was such a powerful little bird that it could almost do a loop on takeoff. I used to listen while my dad was talking flying with some of the real greats of those days, people like Amelia Earhart and Wiley Post, who were among his flying acquaintances, and I was familiar with various flying maneuvers and how to handle an aircraft long before I was in my teens. I did not take any formal lessons, however, until I was 14 or 15 years old. When I signed up with an instructor, Dad told me that this was one luxury he would help me finance. I earned some of the money for my lessons by working on the flight line, washing aircraft, and helping out with odd jobs. It was quite a while, however, before I got into flying as a career. The Army and Navy flying schools were not taking any candidates the year I left high school. So since I could not pursue a flying career, I decided to enlist in the Marine Corps. I left for the Parris Island boot camp as soon as I graduated. The war ended, however, before I could get into combat. I was assigned then to the Naval Academy Prep School and was an alternate for an appointment to Annapolis. The man who was a primary appointee made the grade, however, so I was reassigned to the Marines and wound up on guard duty in Washington, D.C. I was serving with the Presidential Honor Guard in Washington when I was released from duty along with other Marine reservists. After my discharge, I went to Hawaii to live with my parents. My dad was assigned to Hickam Field at the time. I started attending the University of Hawaii, and there I met my wife, Trudy. She was quite active in flying and was planning to complete the requirements for an instructor's license so she could teach flying. We were married in Honolulu and lived there for 2 more years while I continued my studies at the university. We did quite a bit of flying together around the islands. While I was at the university, I received a commission in the U.S. Army ROTC. I transferred to the Air Force and was called to active duty for flight training in the United States after I received my wings. I was assigned to the 525th Fighter Bomber Squadron, which was stationed in Neuberg Air Force Base in Munich, Germany. I spent almost 4 years there flying F-84s and F-86 and managing to get a few credits at the University of Maryland European Extension by attending night school. When I returned to the U.S., I attended the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio for 2 years. I graduated there with a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering and was very pleased when I was sent as a student to the Air Force Experimental Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California. When I graduated from the school, I was assigned to the fighter section of the Flight Test Engineering Division at Edwards. This was an excellent job, and I was fortunate enough to become involved in some extremely interesting test programs. Then, one day, I read that the McDonnell Aircraft Corporation in St. Louis had been awarded the contract to build a space capsule. This really interested me. Flying has always been one of the most fascinating and satisfying things in the world to me, and now that there appeared to be a possibility that we might start flying in space, I could almost taste it. I had been thinking about space, as a matter of fact, ever since I was a kid. I used to read Buck Rogers in the funny papers and wonder if the world was going to have to wait until the 25th century before people might actually go out into space. Not just for the thrill of it, but to explore and discover new things and find out what the planets were really like. Later on, when I started to fly some pretty high-performance airplanes and was getting up to that, we then considered high altitudes and high speeds. I always had what I think is the natural desire of most pilots to want to go a little bit higher and faster. I thought we ought to be trying to extend man's capacities up there. I also had the idea there might be some interesting forms of life out in space for us to discover and get acquainted with. I don't believe in fairy tales, but as far as I am concerned, there have been far too many unexplained examples of unidentified objects sighted around this earth for us to rule out the possibility that some form of life exists out beyond our own world. I certainly don't pretend that the examples we know about necessarily prove anything, but the fact that many experienced pilots had reported strange sights which cannot be easily explained did heighten my curiosity about space. Plain curiosity was not a prime reason for my wanting to become an astronaut, but I do believe that any explorer or researcher must have a certain amount of curiosity in his makeup in order to drive him to discover things which have not yet been found. This was one of the several reasons, then, why I wanted to become an astronaut. I soon found out that Project Mercury was interested in me, too. A few days after I read the announcement about the new space capsule, I was called to Washington, D.C. for some kind of briefing. The reason for my trip was classified, but I had a hunch that it might have something to do with that capsule. NASA engineers spent an entire morning giving up a technical rundown on Project Mercury and what the astronauts' part in it would be. When I saw what a logical step-by-step program NASA had in mind and what a major role the astronauts would have in it, not only as pilots, but in the engineering development of the program as well, I was convinced that I wanted to be a part of it. We were asked later in the day to give our reactions to what we had seen and heard, and to indicate whether or not we were interested. I said that I was definitely sold on the program, and that I very much wanted to become an astronaut. I knew quite a few of the other pilots who were being considered, and I could see that there was going to be some stiff competition for the team. I felt that I would be very lucky if I made the grade, but I wanted the chance to fly a spacecraft so much that I was determined to do my best in the competition and hope for success. First, we had to take several series of technical and psychological tests. These took hours, and they were hard work, but it was rather fun, too. Next came the physical examinations at the Lovelace Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Some of these tests were extremely unpleasant. I think the doctors there found a few places to examine that we didn't even know we had. Then came the psychological or stress tests at Wright-Patterson. These were real challenges. The doctors at Wright-Pat really knew how to separate the tigers from the pussycats. We were isolated, vibrated, whirled, heated, frozen, fatigued, and run to high altitude. Through it all, we got batteries of psychological interviews and exams. I felt when they were all over that I had done very well. I had every confidence when I returned to Edwards that I would make the team. I even told my boss that he ought to start looking for a replacement. I alerted my family to be ready to move, and we took 2 weeks' leave to get ready to pull up stakes. I could not be positive that I would make the grade, but I felt confident, and I intended to be ready. I was not really surprised when the phone call came 2 days after I had returned from leave. The man on the other end of the welcomed me to the team and asked me when I could cut leave for Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, where Project Mercury had its headquarters. "How about right now?" I answered. And those are those chapters. And the last 3 videos concerning the first 2 astronauts, M. Scott Carpenter and Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr. I will continue at a later date, and we'll continue on with the book. Thank you for listening.